Welcome to Big Questions. This is Cal Fussman, an old school guy showing you where the world is headed. As you'll come to see, this episode ends with the approach of a tornado. After the conversation was cut, I became acutely aware of how privileged I was to be able to spend an hour with Mike Bechtel, historian, futurist, and professor at the University of Notre Dame. He makes sense of what's next, and he makes sense of what's new. And that is exactly where this podcast is headed. You're going to have a good time joining us now and in the future because Mike came through the furious winds that recently took out power in South Chicago for about 500,000 people, and he'll be back. There's a special moment in our talk that gets to my sponsor. Moments. Moments allows companies to reward their employees with trips around the world that are put together by a white-gloved concierge team. When I asked Mike where in the world he'd take his daughter Annabelle if he'd been awarded such a trip, he thought about it for more than half a minute. When you watch him try to imagine it, I think you'll see why a moment's trip is so special. No need for beautiful photos from around the world to prove it. No need for a commercial. You look at Mike's face and you see reality, or what he'd like to turn into reality, and just how good that would be. So let's get straight to the conversation about where we're going in the age of AI with Mike Bechtel, an American original, an American treasure. You've got some really cool technology that allows you to hit a button and pictures just shoot up all over the place. Can you take us back to the Gorbachev moment in your life?
Oh man,
because that is a place that I think is, when you told the story, is pretty relevant to us right now. So do you want to just shoot us a picture or a couple of pictures and explain? There's Mikhail Gorbachev, and there you are.
There's me.
This is a while back. That's right there. There's
Right.
you.
So Cal, it's 2002, and if you don't trust me as the narrator, trust all these matching denim shirts that my teammates and I were in. That's the tell. But we're in Orlando at a conference called CTIA, and we're told that a VIP is coming. And we got to dig up one of our newfangled inventions to show him, because at the time I'm a proper lab coat R&D inventor, right? I look like Dwight Schrute from The Office here with these specs. Anyway,
what's the company?
At the time I worked with Accenture, and we're a group within Accenture, this little SEAL team of nerds and wizards called Accenture Technology Labs. And so this VIP turns the corner, lots of photographers, lots of security, and it turns out to be former Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. And scrambling to figure out what to show him, we show him this tech we had built. Cal, do you remember AOL Instant Messenger?
You know what? Vaguely.
A little bit.
But why don't you explain it to everybody, because that was a long time ago.
Well, I mean, it was. So that was for a lot of folks, that was the first exposure to texting, right? It was the instant messenger. You'd call it up, you've got mail. And after mail, we got this little chat box where, I could chat with you, you could chat with me. How you doing, Kay? Great. Well, we had built a little invention on top of it that was an instant message translator. In short, I type English, you get French. You type French, she gets Russian. And so we had this bright idea. Let's show Mikhail Gorbachev, the translator. We'll type English, he'll get Russian. Well, best laid plans, right? Let me show you what went down. Jumping forward, my colleague here, she's speaking the French. I'm over here feeling proud of my nerdy technology. But this gentleman right here, Pavel Palachenko, I think was his name. He was also, his nickname was the Mustache, but he was Mikhail Gorbachev's trusty translator, his guide on the side, his sense maker in all of his, you know, negotiations, conversations with President Reagan, everybody else, Thatcher, you name it. And long story short, as we're explaining this translation tech, look at the look on his face.
My job. What's going to happen to my job?
You can see it. You can see it in real time. Like this thing does what now? Which is all to say, the next night, right? I'm done with my presentation racket. My plan is to hit Space Mountain or something to that effect, and I start feeling not so hot. If I'm honest with you, my stomach's a little sour, and I'm not feeling all that great. And I've actually got pictures of that too in the spirit. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you anything too gross, but in the spirit of, data at the ready, brother. Here's the crime scene, the sicky room. My wife Barb sends me a get well soon Mickey. I think that's a compact iPad in the back, big old laptop. But the punchline, buddy, is this: don't show real-time AI translation technology to a world leader through his translator. Maybe it ends badly. Maybe I just caught a stomach bug. Maybe I caught a little something else.
Uh-oh. I think it's probably the beans or whatever.
I think it was the beans. I think it wasn't until 5 years later a friend of mine goes, you think Pavel had anything to do with that little episode? And I said, nah, I think I'm way too small potatoes. He established me as less than a threat at first sight.
I think Pavel's a good man, and what hit me, my takeaway from the story, is okay. I show up 7 years later to interview Gorbachev, and there he is at his side. And so, even when we start to get a gander at the technology, and we think that this is going to immediately displace us, it takes a while. We have a while to adjust.
I mean, Cal, there's this great quote in the geek community. It's from William Gibson. He's a science fiction author. He wrote a book called Neuromancer, and many others. Mona Lisa Overdrive, whole collection. You said gander, I'll say gaggle. He wrote a whole gaggle of books. But probably his most famous quote, he says, the future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And it's good, right? It's goosebumpy.
Yeah.
Because, here, my fellow geeks are slinging this quote unquote AI light capability nearly 25 years ago. And to your point, man, real-time professional translation is still the state of the art, and I would be very surprised if a, tier one captain of industry, let alone world leader, would trust the nuance and delicacy of a negotiation translation to a bot. And it's 25 years later.
Yeah, and that doesn't even bring up the idea of maybe the bot could easily be hacked.
Yeah, there's this quote from an IBM memo. I think it was written in the early 70s. I can dig that up too for us, but it said a machine can never make management decisions because a machine can never be held accountable. And I always thought that was so interesting, right? And growing up on the southeast side of Chicago between a steel mill and a landfill, my vernacular is a little bit occasionally rough around the edges. And I always remember this idea in leadership called the throat to choke, right? Hey, who's in charge here? Who's a throat to choke? The idea being, with whom does the buck stop?
Right.
And I think to your point, brother, um, the buck can't stop with a robot, because what does that even mean?
Yeah, this is a great way to start the conversation. And I want to take it a little deeper and like into your background to just get a feel for how you became the guy who could just be throwing up these photos while you're doing an interview. Is that AI technology, or is that the basic Riverside technology? As long as you got these photos at your disposal, you just pop them
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, Cal, it's really just a matter. It's no AI. I think it comes down to uh, a lifetime of, call it, digital record keeping. I think an early and often recognition that I could augment my memory by being a cataloger, a collector of all the things, but digitally, because if you if you're taking physical photos and filing physical documents and the rest, you're going to need a lot of space, and it's going to take a lot of time to call that up. But I think I realized early on, I was probably in, I don't know, probably just out of college. I remember my mom, she handed me this box, and it was a lot of my school stuff, like, high school book reports, report cards, photos from the 8th grade field trip to Springfield, Illinois. And what hit me, Cal, it's like, man, if I just scan these suckers in, right? Not all at once, that would be a slog, but almost as a hygiene thing, right? I'm on a conference call, feed a pic, right? I'm reading a book, feed a pic. Before you know it, I'd have this monstrous memory that didn't take any space and that could be easily searched. And what I learned, Cal, over the years was, as hard drives got bigger and cheaper, as AI technology and such got stronger and more capable, I had this personal library of Alexandria, if you will, at the ready. And somebody goes, "Hey, you ever do musical theater?" And I go, "Well, yeah, actually, you want to see my rendition of 76 trombones from 1991, The Music Man?" And they go, "What? Why do you have that?" And the answer is, slow and steady won that race.
Okay, so basically, you have lived the exact opposite philosophy that I have, where
What do
I
you mean? Tell me.
traveled around the world for 10 years without a home. I basically went without a camera because I did not want the camera to interfere with the trip.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to be completely absorbed in whatever minute I was in. Now I really regret that decision. Now I wish I was Mike, that I had used the instrument in the best way and not allowed it to take over the entire trip, which is actually a metaphor for AI. No slot. I wouldn't have, if I didn't allow the slop, if I didn't have it out all the time and
Right.
trying to take pictures that didn't matter, or just people who were didn't really add much to the experience.
Right.
I guess, look, those could have just been deleted, and that's probably what a photographer does, but I didn't do it. Now I don't, the whole trip is just really the best moments that I can remember.
But I think what you've hit on, Cal, is a real trade-off, a real conscious uh, contrast here, because you know it, I've talked to a lot of. I have three kids myself: Brady, Annabelle, Bennett. They're 20, 16, and 14, and they're of that generation that looks back to, say, video or pictures of a concert in the 1990s, and everybody's locked in and engaged in the moment and watching Nirvana or Smashing Pumpkins or whatever, and they lament the fact that in their world everybody's got their phone up and they're sort of half present. It reminds me, it'd be fun to see if I could find this one. Did you ever see that? Did you ever see that picture that contrasts the election of Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, like before and after the iPhone?
I know you can find this in a finger snap.
Hold on. We're gonna have to. This might not be on my hard drive. This might be on the Goog. But give me one sec. Hold on. Same thing. Google's an extended memory of a sort, right? Okay, here we go. Man, yeah, that came up quick. All right. So check this one out, Cal.
That says it all. Says
2005, which is about, I think the iPhone dropped in 06, 07, right in there. But there's a new pope. It's a conclave, right? Everybody's enwrapped, right? Pay attention. And less than a decade later, to your point, brother, every one of those cats on the bottom has that photo and has that memory. But do they? Were they locked in?
Wow.
It's a trade-off. In my opinion, it's a trade-off.
This is the essential question that I'd like to dive in and see where you take me. People who listen to the podcast may know that when I was a young guy, I traveled around the world for 10 years without a home. It was off and on. It wasn't complete. I came back and said hi to my folks and family and friends occasionally, but I just moved from place to place, and people took me in and passed me on to their friends and relatives, and that's the way I moved.
Huh.
And I keep thinking about how this applies to where we are now with AI, and I think this podcast is literally me doing the same thing, because now I'm here with you and we're having this conversation. You're showing me technology I never saw before, or now I can think, maybe I could put my own pictures up when I'm in the middle of a podcast. And then you're going to say something, you're going to pass me on to somebody who may show up in the podcast next week or 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. You're all passing me forward. But I'm beginning to get a grasp of the question that I've got to hone in on. And that is, okay, you've just showed me like a great tool. Yeah. And you also just showed me like 2 photos, one that showed people all in the moment, completely zoned in, and another trying to capture the moment with the tool.
Right.
And it seems to me that this is where we're at in history. And people have made it a decision. We're going this way, or no, we want to stay back in the old days. And I'm looking for this middle ground that says, take the best and leave the rest, of both sides.
Yeah.
How would you have to think in order to be able to do that? You've got this magnificent library now of images. Right. But you can get to the best in a finger snap.
Right. Cal, one of the probably one of the most important moments in my life was I sat down in it was the first or second session of an anthropology class I was taking in college. I would go on to become an anthropology major. And our professor, this guy, Dr. James Bellis, Jim, he was, sort of a Santa Claus beard, Rensselaer, Indiana. Like, as the kids would say today, he was a vibe. But Dr. Bellis comes into class, and his opening line, it stuck with me for years. He goes, technology is just a puffy-chested 4-syllable synonym for tool. And I'm sitting there, I also studied engineering, right? And I looked to my buddy, I'm like, what technology? What? Like, am I in the right class? And what he goes on to say, Cal, he says, Homo habilis, right, which is Homo sapiens' predecessor, called habilis was handyman. It was the first hominid that could pick up and use tools. He said Homo habilis built the first sharpened stone flakes as a knife to speed up the time it would take to procure and prepare your dinner. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, okay, yeah, I think I've seen this on nature shows or something. But here's where he flips the script, Cal. He goes, that was a hack. And I go, hack? Like, again, mixing technology and anthropology. What do you mean hack? He goes, it was like a computer hacker. It was a hack, a time saver to free their cycles for higher order pursuits. And I'm thinking, like, what? And he goes, well, if you spend less time preparing your dinner, you got more time to, say, offload your thoughts to little chicken scratch shapes on a stone, right? The original writing. And that was a hack that freed time to allow you to cook up the first printing press and all the rest. And so I'm thinking, okay, for everything we automate, okay, and this was my big aha, Cal. Every time we automate with tools and tech, we create the opportunity to elevate, right? Humans can get busy on higher order stuff. And I think in the near term, right? Like when the personal computer came out, there were all these stories like, now that robots can calculate, accountants will be extinct in 3 months. My son's studying accountancy. What? I think the punchline is you automate the muck so that you can elevate up to the new magic. And then 15 years later, when you start threatening to automate what used to be magic, you say, no, that's muck. We got higher mountains to climb, right? Together, I think what it creates, Cal, is kind of an automation waterline. And it keeps moving up. It's been moving up for 2.5 million years. The trick is, are we going to complain about it? Right? Are we going to use it for mustache twisting villainy? Or are we going to say, oh, cool, what good, righteous stuff can we do now that we don't have to remember so much, or that we don't have to think about, nitty problems so much? And so to me, it's technology is just a tool. It's a force multiplier for our ambitions. And I think people's ambitions and intent have always mattered and will continue to matter.
Okay, so here's the question with AI, and I'm really starting to grapple with this.
Okay.
Because I'm bumping into people who are pushing back against it.
Yeah.
And we've talked a little about this before, but like 30% of Gen Z is not only saying, like, we don't want this, they're angry about it. They're saying, what's in it for me? You're going to take away my entry-level position. You're going to have the AI drink up all the water. And there are cooling systems being invented for these data centers, but even then, what's overlooked is it still takes up like 10 times more water, just because the costs of electricity are much more. So it's an environmental point that has to be addressed. And it's there. Another point they make, which is backed up by this statistic, there are these clinicians that basically diagnose tumors, and they were put through a test, And
Okay.
in this test, they showed what they could do before AI came in to help diagnose the tumors.
Okay.
Then AI came in and made them a lot better at what they do. And then they took the AI away and say, okay, now go and diagnose tumors again. And they had diminished by 6%.
So it was momentary rocket fuel, but ultimately made them worse.
That's right. And I had on the podcast last week a recording artist. Her name's Lachi. She's a very interesting figure. She's blind, and she was telling me how she basically uses AI for a lot of reasons of accessibility. It's like
Mm-hmm.
really helpful for her life.
Right. Right.
And she said, but I got so involved that I was just yeah, write this email for me, write this for me, write that for me. And all of a sudden she said to herself, no, I'm gonna write the email for myself.
Right. A moment of a declaration of self.
That's right. And
I
so
love it.
she
Yeah.
puts her hands on the keys and say, like, how do you write an email again? And
Right.
she's thinking, what is happening to me?
There's Cal, remember the Disney Pixar movie Wall-E?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think of that a lot now.
Yeah,
Yes.
same. I mean, I think there is a really prescient movie because it was 15 years now, or almost 20, I think, since that dropped, maybe 20.
Do you want to
But
give a little basic description so
yeah,
people have an
yeah,
idea because maybe they never saw it?
yeah, 100%. My kiddos were teeny tiny when that one dropped. But essentially, far future, adorable little robot. Um, his job is he's a trash collector, and humans have long since left the earth because we trashed it. No pun intended. And but he doesn't know. He didn't care. His mission is keep compacting trash and building trash mountains. And then a whole plot unveils where the humans come back and he meets a love interest and the whole thing's adorable. But in truth, the story is one of human over reliance on tech creates a future of sloth and gluttony. Like everybody in the future is pretty, shall we say, portly, full
Yeah,
of.
they can barely move.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're all in their Barca loungers drinking Slurpees, and and the scene that always gives me goosebumps, though, Cal, is at the tail end of the movie. I think they make a really great design choice. In fact, I just got the hairs up thinking of it. They go away from the 3D Pixar wow graphics and they go to sort of a 2D animated style. In this wonderful Peter Gabriel song comes on, and they show how the humans who come back to Earth, not only do they slim down substantially, but they start relearning how to garden. They start relearning how to fish, how to draw with their own hands, and it's this sort of like touch grass moment. And I think Cal, what you're speaking to with that radiology example and what I'm seeing as well is that it's really important that we don't in our race up this hockey stick, right? As men might wish to be gods, that we don't lose connection to the basics. Because I think, Bud, there's a one of the world's first chief AI officers, this woman named Sal Rashidi. She calls it intellectual atrophy, right? In pop culture, some call it idiocracy. But but the idea that if you jump right to the end and you skip all the bits in the middle, may God have mercy on your soul if you're ever disconnected from the machines. Now, on the flip side, there's a lot of people say you never will be. Between Starlink and everything else, we're always going to be cyborgs and connected. But I'm with you, bud. You got to touch grass.
Is this what we're seeing with Gen Z now? They're going back, and you mentioned your kids. I know a
Yeah.
little about them from talking to you and
Yeah.
how like your daughter is thinking about music as it was back when we were kids,
Right.
when like the CD or before that the album came out, and
Right.
it was put together by the artist in a very particular way. I want this song on the album to go after this song. It's like a batting lineup in baseball.
Oh, it's a
This is
perfect
batting
analogy. Exactly.
fourth. This is batting third. This bats eighth, and there was reasons for it in their mind, and Annabelle wants to experience that,
Yeah.
whereas many people would just allow the algorithm to say, "Oh, you like that song? I got something else you would like. Here it is." And you never
Yeah.
get to hear the second song or the third
Right.
song or
Yeah.
the fourth song.
The math, the mathematical dopamine dealer just giving you your next hit, right?
Yeah,
You know,
you like this and you're going to like that. And forget the fact that maybe the artist who created that album had dueling versions. So the song one
right.
might have been very different from song two.
Well, you know what it reminds me of, Cal. And I will. I'll share with you my story about Annabelle for you and for our listeners here. But I remember reading an interview with Jimmy Page, the guitarist and one of the songwriters of Led Zeppelin, and he talks about how what made Led Zeppelin was a intentional mix of light and shade. That was his language for it. He said the reason the guitars on, say, Whole Lot of Love hit so hard is because there are space, or there is space between the notes.
Right.
There is a song before with dulcimer, though I think that was the first track on the record. But if you're mixing the heavy metal with a healthy dose of ukulele and pan flute, you're going to get a richer tapestry. The brights are brighter, the darks are calmer. And to your point, when the digital dopamine dealer is just hitting you with the next shiny thing and the next shiny thing and the next shiny thing, I think you lose some artistic intent. And so my daughter Annabelle, is 15. Well, now she's 16, but I remember when she turned 15, she got really into full albums. And part of it was because they used, the beater that we bought her. Uh, lucky kid, she's got a car. Bad news, it's falling apart. But anyway, it had a CD player. And she said, Dad, can you get me Fleetwood Mac Rumors? And I'm laughing, Cal, because back to our opening, man, I digitized that thing 20 years ago and gave it to Goodwill. Like, I haven't had a physical record in forever. I said, honey, as your geek father, I'll tell you the bit stream on the CD is the same as the bit stream on the lossless, MP whatever. And she's like, no, Dad, can you like cool it with the old people stuff? And and I'm thinking like, wait, streaming music is old people stuff? Because like the end of Wall-E, she wants to touch grass and get back to a physical thing,
right,
laid out in the way that Lindsay and Stevie intended. And so Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, those are those are her big two right now. But you go in her car and all she's missing, Cal, is that old Case Logic. Remember that 90s folder where you'd have your CDs? I'm thinking of getting her one for Christmas.
Here's I have this sponsor. It's called Moments, and the reason I'm so happy and actually proud of having this sponsor is what it does. It basically sells trips to companies that they can use to reward employees who do great work. Okay. So it's all about valuing the human.
Yeah.
And they have a white glove concierge staff that basically takes all the details away and actually asks them questions. Like they can say, okay, Mike, you've just been rewarded this
Mm-hmm.
trip. You can go anywhere in the world you want to go. And maybe you want to take the whole family. Maybe you're thinking, you know what? I want to take Annabelle to a concert. Like
Yeah.
right now, I want to show her my world, even though when you look on stage, it's 30 years later. Where would you want to take her? Who
Oh
would you
man,
want her to see with you?
boy, that's fun. That's a fun question. And yes, I'm stalling as I think.
You,
Um,
you know what? I just saw a video of Steve Jobs being asked a question,
yeah,
and he thought for 19 seconds.
I've seen
Bef-
that one. Isn't that
you,
great?
isn't that great?
The best. It's yeah, like the bronze medal is the schmo who makes up an instant answer because he's terrified of space. The silver medal is the usual thing of like, good question, as I buy myself time to react. Steve just stood there and thought for like half a minute.
And right now, you're on Steve Jobs' time. You can think about this the longer you think, it means to me the more you're going to cherish the answer. So, okay, you have been through a little of this cycle with Annabelle. You know the music she likes.
Right.
Some of the musicians that you might have want to have taken her to are not with us any longer. But who around is now that would allow you to give her that
Yeah.
the experience in the photo in 2005. And I
Right.
know this is possible because I have a daughter who is very similar in that she became very curious uh,
Right.
like about the Doobie Brothers,
Nice.
and she went back to see them, and she came back and reported like they nobody was holding up a phone. It was it was the wildest thing, Dad. They're
Right.
just like
They're
into
just
in the moment.
they were instructed to listen to the music and they listened to the music. But
That's
but
good. That's
yeah,
good.
you know, I think I think for three reasons because you've given me that righteous gift of time to really noodle this one.
I was stalling for it, man.
Yeah,
I
well,
was
good. You
giving
did
you
great.
Steve
You did great. I
Jobs
wasn't
time.
even distracted by, you know, S- Skunk Baxter and Michael McDonald distractions. That's good. Um, I think it would be really great to take Annabelle to Abbey Road Studios, and and here's why. Thing one, my wife Barb and I met in London, and so there's a certain historical mojo there of let's go back to the 90s where mom and dad first caught a liking for each other. I think thing two, given her fandom of full albums and genuine creativity, I mean it's hard to do much worse than the Beatles. But I think thing three, um how cool would it be? And man, I know he just came through Chicago, and I caught him with Barb, but not Belle. How cool would it be to see that a nearly 90-year-old Sir Paul is still running around playing these songs authentically to tens of thousands of people. I mean, one of the best bucket list things I've done in the last few years was seeing Paul McCartney, and yeah, you expect to hear some of the Mount Rushmore of Beatles hits, but man, like if you would have asked me if I'd ever see Paul McCartney play Band on the Run live, no way, and it was magical. So yeah, I'd love to create that mashup for Annabelle.
Wow. That's that's wild. And it's even more confirmation to me just watching what you went through
Yeah,
to say this is the moment I want to have with my daughter.
right.
And just it was joyous just to watch you go through that.
But what was joyous as well, I want to just celebrate our gracious host and fearless leader here. Your willingness to create that space and ample space to think about something and then deliver it. I deliver the answer. I think that that's kissing cousins with the theme of our whole discussion today, namely, in a world of exponentials where you can do 100 things in the time you used to do two. What a gift it is to be told, no, actually, just give me one really good one, right? Because I think, at the risk of sounding cliched, bud, in a world of abundance, uh, I think time is going to be the new luxury. I think quiet is going to be the new luxury. I mean, what greater virtue in this modern mayhem than Cal giving you 30 seconds to just reflect and, you know, live in that moment.
It's because I know I saw your face, and
Yeah.
I knew something great was going to come out of it. Somehow I think your daughter's going to get to Abbey Road at some point in some way after she hears this. And you know what? She deserves it because she's thinking this way.
She is. There's, to your point about generations, Cal, I do think there is, people are different, and, it's tough to paint with a broad generational brush, but I remember being at my brother-in-law's house for Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and he had this Peloton for strength training. It's called Tonal, and it uses, I believe, magnets and giant rubber bands, or something going on that allows this little monolithic rectangle to feel like you're bench pressing 300 pounds. And I remember checking it out, and my son Brady, who's now 20 at the time, maybe 16, I was like, Brady, check this out. It's all the benefits of a full gym in one little technology filled rectangle. And he looks at me, and shades of Annabelle, honestly, he goes, I don't, what's with this? Like, I don't know. It's like cringy old people stuff. Can't you just get like iron? And I thought to myself, man, like, I think it would be jumping to conclusions to say that my two kids' points make a line, but I do think that there's maybe a Gen Alpha, Gen Z thing here where there's a rejection of, what did we call it earlier? Digital dopamine dealers.
That was a great
And
phrase.
a bit of an embrace of the real.
Well, this is exactly the place that I was hoping to get to, because I'm actually seeking some answers into how we can get the best. How do you get the best of what AI is delivering without the slop? And there does not seem to be an overview of a few people or many people that are basically saying, no, we're not allowing the slop in. And I get it. Like you look, most of us come to believe that there's like good in the world, there's evil in the world, and it's probably balanced, and they're like fighting for eternity. But what I'm thinking is, like, why not take out the slop? Why not diminish the evil? I mean, is this an opportunity for us to step up and only like locate what's really good and basically seize upon the things that aren't working, or and this is my question for you.
Yeah.
Like, how do we do what Annabelle is doing naturally, and your son, and saying, no, we are gonna get we're gonna get the medal and we're gonna lift it ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Not only that, but we're gonna hang out with ourselves while we do it, and we're gonna laugh like we did back in the 70s and the 60s, and we're going to get the most out of our humanity while we still get the best out of this new technology.
I think it's a cool question, Cal, because one of the things I know that's driven me batty in this modern moment, and I know you and I jammed about this a titch over our last couple of hangouts, but there's a tendency, there's a binary tendency to talk about AI as hero or villain, right? Like it's a panacea, or no, it's a Pandora's box. And and I've always been a Shades of Grey enthusiast. Not the book necessarily, though. Some people tell me it's great, but there's a nuanced middle between heroics and villainy that I like to think of as, quote, merely very useful. Right? Back to that Homo habilis thing I mentioned earlier. Tech, no matter how whiz bang, it's a force multiplier for the person using it. I'll give you an example. Think of fire, which we're going way back. Fire as tool, but bear with me. If a person uses fire mindfully, they can cook dinner.
Right.
If they use it maliciously, right, mustache twisting villain, you burn your neighbor's house down. But between the two, you use it mindlessly, right? Just sort of knuckleheadery, like half asleep at the wheel, like whoa, 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 you light your thumb on fire. I'm thinking of that scene from Young Frankenstein. Whoa.
Oh yeah, great scene.
Right. Yeah, great scene. Okay, that's fire. Okay, now substitute fire for fission, nuclear fission, Oppenheimer. Right.
Right.
You use fission mindfully. You cook every dinner in town. Right. That's called a reactor. You use fission maliciously. Yeah, you knock out every house in town. Right? That's a bomb. And then what's the Frankenstein thumb equivalent? It would be like, oops, Chernobyl, Fukushima, like pick your proverbial poison. Well, because we're having fun with the pictures, hold on. Let me dare to show you this. This is me in Sao Paulo, Brazil, about three months ago. Someone took a picture of one of my slides, and I almost back to the reel. I almost like the picture of my slide better than my slide because it's got heads in it and lighting. But I think, Cal, we're the heroes we're looking for. If we choose to use these AI tools as a means to automate muck, and then use that free time to rock out to Lindsay and Stevie albums, or lift metal, or touch grass, or convene with ourselves and our families, then it'll be what Arthur C. Clarke called, or maybe Isaac Asimov, I always confuse them, indistinguishable from magic. Woo! If we treat this stuff as a craven, mustache-twisting villainy tool, you'll blow us extinct, for sure. Right? We'll get 65% worse at finding tumors, and we'll all check out. But to me, Cal, I think it's that middle row. Honestly, that's where I think we're going to really need to spend more time, and it's what I call stamping out ignorance, right? Slaying ambiguity, defeating knuckleheadery and mindlessness, because I don't see that many saints or sinners right now with AI. What I see is just like lazy knuckleheads, right? Hey, you know what? I don't need to have my own thoughts on LinkedIn, so I'm gonna press the outsource thought leadership button, and then we're all worse for it because we're sitting there in the slop and the crap, and so that's to me, man, it's we'll let the cybersecurity professionals fight that red curve on the bottom. There's people on the case, but I think my life's work for the rest of my days is going to be spending a lot of time trying to get that yellow crowd into the green. And honestly, I think that just comes down to information, inspiration, and you know, encouraging people to dare to be great.
How does this wrap into teaching people
Oh,
to stay together, to communicate? I saw a statistic, like we people speak way less words now
really?
than they did like 20 years ago.
Huh?
We don't talk and communicate. There's a
Like,
loneliness epidemic for a reason.
right? Like size of vocabulary or just number of sounds coming out of your mouth
I
in a given
think
day?
it is the number of words coming
Huh?
out of your mouth. Some
I
scientists,
believe that.
and it makes sense if people are alone in a room. It makes sense if they are ordering a DoorDash to bring the food to their house and not walking over to the local bar and getting a bowl of chili and talking to the
Yeah,
person next to them.
yeah. I, I, you know, I've spoken to both my two oldest in such a positive light. You know, woe is me if I use Bennett as the example of like the bad actor stuff. But my little guy, he's 14, and it's interesting because I can see that reluctance to to have a conversation with somebody because tipping and tapping online is just an easier thing. And I know like that if that were the end of my story, it would be a tired trope, and we all know the story about kids and devices, and great. But I remember I remember when the internet first came out. My whole as a futurist, right? I always like to say futurists are closeted historians, and we make sense of what's coming by knowing what's been. I remember when the internet dropped in the 90s, Cal, it was an introvert's dream because you could look stuff up without having to talk to a librarian. You could book a flight without having to talk to a travel agent. And there was this whole generation of, I think it was Gen X mostly, people like myself, who who really developed a preference for like just the facts, ma'am. Transactional online, give me the phone tree. I don't want to talk to nobody. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if that turns a bit, right? If like the heavy metal and the heavy metal, but tis, but like the music and the weights, if that loneliness epidemic doesn't result in the pendulum coming back a bit and people saying, "Hey, I just want to talk to people," and I see it, with my big guy, like he's notionally majoring in accounting, but the skills that are going to matter to him are trustworthiness, looking somebody in the eye, firm handshake, and it sounds so reductionist, but I believe personally, peopling is going to be the hot skill in a world where machines can do all the stuff that all the STEM degrees have been so focused on. I mean, we've been in a 25-year, in my opinion, national nightmare of STEM over specialization. And so soft skills, classics, humanities, I think that's going to be making a comeback.
I had two thoughts as you're talking. One of them I just couldn't get out of my mind,
Yeah.
because I believe that it's much better for us to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that I went around the world for about 10 years without a home, so I was used to getting on trains and buses and looking for an empty seat next to somebody who
Right.
was interesting to see where the conversation would go. Hopefully, it would lead to them inviting me home to dinner or giving me a place to stay.
Sure.
Uh, but you know what you just hit? There are people who, like back in the day, they just would not stop talking. I don't
The
know if you
motor mouth.
remember. I don't know if you remember those people, but I had. There's one person. I'm not even going to identify them as male or female,
Yeah.
but they went on a road trip with a friend of mine, and so my friend was locked in the car with this person for like 6 days,
Sure.
and this person worked at a newspaper, and everybody knew he was on this road trip. And he came back into the office and he was wearing band-aids on his ears.
You've got me laughing. Remember when that politician Howard Dean got in trouble for laughing awkwardly? You've made me laugh. You've made me cackle twice, Cal.
well, some of the good old days weren't always good. Like obviously you get a funny story out of it, but I think that like I can also understand like this younger generation like is now wired to kind of get to it. I don't need to call up the pizza place to
Right.
order the pizza. Now I'm talking to parents who said like their kids are actually scared to call up the pizza place. It's an activity that they're just were
Well,
not accustomed to doing.
I saw that, that back to that history tour that I gave us a little bit ago. Like the Gen Xers were relieved that they didn't have to your point, maybe talk quite so much. Generally speaking, broad strokes, millennials came in and essentially expected that, right? Just the facts, ma'am. Extra conversation was, to use, not that we need to bring Shakespeare into this, but sound and fury signifying nothing, empty calories,
Right.
waste.
Yeah.
And yeah, and taken to one extreme, it becomes social anxiety for everyone, or it becomes a pendulum swing back. You know, the it's funny, back to my continued parlor tricks with the old pictures. My kindergarten music teacher, her name was Doris Hoff. And then I would go on to have her again in high school. It was funny. She changed schools, I changed schools, and I bump into her now, from 5 to 15. It's like, you again. But she says to me at 15, she goes, "Do you remember in kindergarten when I drew that picture of you on the blackboard?" And I said, No, what do you mean?" She goes, "You wouldn't stop talking. I called you a mouth with feet, and you kept talking still. And so I drew you on the board, and your whole class had to like ridicule you to get you to shush." But I think the reason I bring it up is, yeah, the motor mouth is such an anachronism, such an old-fashioned concept in this age of click and type that who knows, maybe, well, how's this for a bit of a leap? Maybe this great nation or the whole world is ready for its next Mark Twain. Maybe we just need somebody to come out and show some good old-fashioned certified organic human storytelling to kind of snap out of our crappy robot impressions we've all been living for the last decade.
Wow, maybe that was the answer I was looking for from the very first minute.
Yeah, I'll take it.
And you know what? It really applies to getting the best. Having somebody telling a great story that makes a point that gets tattooed to a mind for the rest of their lives. That's beautiful. Somebody
Yeah.
spouting an endless fountain of words that doesn't give us anything. Well, maybe that should kind of be pushed aside. But I mean, wow, what if What if the world was filled with Mark Twains?
I mean, Cal, you just again goosebumped me with that one. I really do. I always tell people when I got goosebumps because the cameras aren't good enough for you to see it right here. But as a inventor turned investor, now futurist and professor, I butter my bread speaking to boards, C-suites, company all hands conferences, making sense of what's new and next in tech, right? Like my job is to be a sense maker. And a big chunk of that is an understanding of technology, an understanding of business, an understanding of society, how they all come together. Great. But something that I've learned over the last 5 years, Cal, is that as big a part as those. Oh, that's exciting. Thunderstorm
okay?
warning. Yeah, we just have it's a tornado warning. Cal, it's a tornado warning in my neighborhood. Is warning the one where it's coming at you or the one where it might come at you?
Oh, no.
I'm going to go ahead and keep cooking. If it gets more exciting, I'll run away and we'll record the rest. You'll see me in a different shirt. You'll know it's tomorrow. But here's what I was going to say, bud. We could fix that in post, as the kids say.
I actually would like to make sure you're safe.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Okay. And
Okay.
You know what? This has been an incredible conversation, and it calls for another. So why don't we make sure you're safe to have another, and you can come back, because I think you're just getting me started.
Oh, Cal, I've had such a great time with you. And a little teaser to that next convo. I've come to learn, like you have, sir, that storytelling, narrative, and sense making matters as much or more than all of that geeky domain knowledge. Let the robots let the robots do the steak. I think humans are going to be counted on to do the sizzle. I'm gonna go hide in a bunker.
This is usually where we place beautiful photos of moments trips around the world. This week, I'd like to try a different approach. I'd like you to take a moment to realize the blessing we have to be here right now amid the tornadoes of craziness going on in the world. And I'd like you to ask yourself, where would you take your parents, your spouse, your kids, a close friend, if you were awarded a moment's trip? What Mike taught me about a moment's trip is you might not realize what was on your bucket list until someone asks. Think about it. Where would you go? And who would you take?